Trump is following that kind of logic today, that he thinks he has more to lose by debating Harris again. And this is one of those stories that is about politics tonight, because debates can impact the vote. It's also, though, about precedent, because the Trump era has killed off many precedents that were one thought unbreakable. Remember, it was just this year that the Biden campaign booted the long-standing presidential commission, which sets up all these debates. And the Biden folks did that to negotiate their own debate with CNN that they got Trump to agree to. The commission had refused the earlier debates Biden wanted. Now we have both nominees in a new environment where that tradition's been axed. This commission, which I'm telling you goes all the way back to the Nixon era, has been dethroned. And that's important. That matters because the tradition and structure that used to exist is not here. There is no commission that's operating right now, which is the sponsor of the usual October debate. And we know the history. The Biden campaign, by going around the commission, did get its demanded earlier debate, which then sparked the push to replace Biden as the nominee. And that switch brings us to the other big campaign news tonight and one of my special reports for you. There are very tangible, measurable signs of momentum for Harris with these headlines about her surging in national polls. If you've been anywhere near the news, the TV, or the internet today, or on social media, I bet you've seen some of these headlines. Harris up in the polls. Now remember, a national poll does not reflect what will happen in the election. But it does show us something. The national election will ultimately be decided by the states in the Electoral College system. That's why, like Hillary Clinton, you could be up in the national poll and still lose. But here's what I'm going to show you. The new NBC poll does have Harris up 5, far better than Biden's position a few months back, and it's driving headlines and buzz for Harris in politics, certainly online. The spread is still within the margin of error. And in the states that matter, as we showed you last week, things are largely a statistical tie. But what national polls can help reveal is big shifts in sentiment, especially when it's current. So instead of asking just how people might vote in the future in 5 or 6 weeks if they vote early, you can measure how the nation feels right now. And that's where there's really good news for Harris. There is a huge, unusually large jump in favorable views of Harris since she became the nominee. So the poll is asking, how do you feel today? And a lot more people today are feeling good about her. In fact, it's the largest such increase in decades, as Kornacki and Welker reported on the new Meet the Press.
This is the largest increase that we have seen for any politician since George W. Bush in the wake of the September 11th attacks on this issue.
Absolutely, Kristen. I mean, we were seeing numbers like this for years for Kamala Harris. Now you're seeing a very different story.
Many more Americans right now have a more favorable view of Harris. And pollsters note how remarkable a shift that is, going back to the surge in approval for President Bush and the historic demonstration of unity after the 9/11 attack. That's when Bush's favorability surged, partly because people felt favorably towards him and his response, and partly because of a longer and documented rally around the flag effect. So historians and pollsters note it is rare for the public to suddenly just like a prominent politician way more than they used to, because they already know that person and views tend to be more baked in. The 2001 example reflects that external event and response. With all that in mind and what Kornacki just said there, here are Harris's numbers. She had a 32% favorability in July, which roughly reflects the sloping blue curve that you see of where she'd been. And that was her role of VP. 1 out of 3 is not a great benchmark for winning a national election, if 32% or so is 1 out of 3 people thinking of you favorably. But then you have this jump. Look at that huge jump to 48%. And that is about 50% higher than that prior number, or a raw 16-point surge, one of the largest shifts in decades for any politician. So that's the big news tonight. The Harris campaign is happy about it, while still cautioning people nothing is set yet. But why is Harris rising in ways we have not seen in decades? In my report right now for you, I'm going to show why the answer actually has some layers and why it may explain the race that we're in right now, the current state of the race, and even where we're headed. So first, within the Democratic Party, there was a shockwave, swapping out a president with fading numbers for the new VP. And the party managed to do so, and I know you know this because you follow the news, They did so without any big primary or long jockeying public process. And that has clearly energized and united both the party, Democrats, and anti-Trump forces who might not be Democrats, independents, or moderates, who were not sold on Trump or opposed Trump, but were also concerned about Biden. The numbers show an embrace for Harris as that new alternative. And then, I said layers, the second layer may be how people are viewing Harris now in a new role. And here's what we can tell you. The people like her in this role. Being the nominee and the party leader taking on Donald Trump is different from being a deferential, deliberately smaller, quieter role of understudy or vice president to the president. And by playing that role well, many experts say Harris had to dim her shine. And that's literally the term that some historians and strategists use, citing an ancient precept that in political struggles, you never outshine the master. Always make those above you feel completely superior. In your desire to please and impress them, do not go too far in displaying your talents, or you might accomplish the opposite, inspiring fear and insecurity in them. Make your masters appear more brilliant than they are, and you will attain the heights of power. And that's not just a tip. I am quoting from the #1 law, the very first law in the 48 Laws of Power, a best-selling history and strategy book by Robert Greene, who we actually cited and hosted on this program before. The lesson applies to anyone biding time for higher office, certainly a vice president, but it dates back centuries. There are ancient strategy teachings from Machiavelli to Galileo, and how they carefully paid tribute to superiors or financial backers in the Medici family, always making their accomplishments subservient to whoever was more powerful. Here's the author discussing the lesson along with 50 Cent, who later co-authored a book with Greene and applied it to entertainment, where you know competition is fierce and how you cannot outshine your sponsor.
Law number 1 was always like the most important one to me. Never outshine the master.
You know the laws of power, you never outshine the master. Mm-hmm. You see what I'm saying? Like, I even had a conversation and said it to Drake. Mm-hmm. I said, don't ever go over or be past Wayne in conversation, because it'll hurt you. Because then if you got somebody that's actually over you in your chain of command, you always like that.
Chain of command. Understand it, or you may not survive it. That's 50, that's Greene, other political writers. They're not saying they invented these power laws, rather that they've studied and applied them. And if it all sounds familiar, it is a tale and fable as old as time.
When I left you, I was but the learner. Now I am the master.
I took away your fear, and I showed you a path. You are my greatest student.
Always two there are. No more, no less. A master and an apprentice.
If you are the apprentice, you have to know how to be a good apprentice and not think you're jumping ahead to becoming the master. Now, today, we see Harris as the boss, in the prime position. She's a dominant figure in the Democratic Party. She started this week by seizing control, challenging Trump to a debate that he's running from, making him respond to her and her perceived win at the last debate. And that is the Harris in the role that we are seeing many more Americans now like, quite literally. They're responding positively to her in this role as the boss in charge, which is a shift from her past vice presidential role, and it's a shift people are noticing.
Please welcome Kamala Harris. Everybody is saying it. You all have said it. I know you have. It seems to us that something happened to you the moment President Biden, stepped aside and withdrew his candidacy, that a veil or something dropped and you just stepped into your power.
If somebody breaks in my house, they're getting shot.
Yes, I hear that. I hear that.
Probably should not have said that.
But
my staff will deal with that later.
Yeah.
I'm just smiling from ear to ear, Oprah. I have never felt this much joy and optimism in a campaign in a long time.
When your adversaries will try and turn your strength into a weakness, Don't you let them. Don't you let them. I find joy in the American people. I find joy and optimism.
Here at the Democratic National Convention, the energy is all about joy, change, joy, and some sweet dance moves.
Kamala Harris. Let's have a good debate.
As the saying goes, if you've got something to say, say it to my face.
Harris is the boss. She's in the spotlight, which she earned by knowing when to stay out of it and defer, given the important but secondary role that she took as a dutiful VP. For our report tonight, it's also worth seeing the evidence of how different it was when she was in that other role, Vice President to Biden, applying that power law and supporting the administration in that more conventional role.
Just today, President Biden announced record job growth. From the beginning, the president has been very direct and clear about our perspective, and I can think of no one more committed to achieving our collective goals than President Joe Biden. President Biden set an ambitious goal. Today's numbers reflect the point that President Biden has made many times. America's economy is strong.
And what's the message to Iran?
Don't.
As President Biden said, just don't.
Exactly. One word. Pretty straightforward.
You can almost see and hear the difference, and that is what the law would teach, because that was the role she was in. Just as if you are a lawyer advocating a case, it's different than if you get appointed to become a judge. Anyone can relate to this at a certain level when you have a role or a job. It could be parent or soccer coach. It could be vice president of your company or CEO of your company. Harris maintained that stance even and especially when it was difficult. Consider those moments after Biden's debate performance, which we now know led to the shift in her rise. In those first hours that night after the debate, Harris did not waver at all. She stepped into the heat for interviews, including one on this network that night. She was talking to our colleague Rachel. And she was as loyal as ever, as the role demands. And if others were already discussing the perhaps remote, perhaps looming possibility of her becoming the replacement, becoming the master rather than the apprentice, she did not engage in any of that, not one iota that night or in the weeks ahead, let alone try to outshine the president. In fact, it's so striking to sort of see this now with where the race is right now that we're going to show some of that to you at length.
I think a lot of people who are fans and supporters of President Biden, or who are Democrats, or who are just worried about the prospect of Donald Trump returning to the presidency, feel like this was not a strong performance tonight from President Biden. I want to hear your assessment and how you respond to those critics.
Well, it was a slow start. There's no question about that. But I thought it was a strong finish. What we had in Joe Biden is someone who wanted to have a debate based on facts, based on truth. And in Donald Trump, we had what we have come to expect, which is someone who's going to push lies and distract from the reality of the damage he has created and continues to create in our country. What Donald Trump is doing is grasping for straws. And look, there are only, of the two people on that debate stage, only one of them has the endorsement of his vice president. And let's not forget that. Let's not forget that.